I'd like to take a little bit of time to share some of my background as an inventor and scientist. But let's go back to where it began. It began when I was young, and where other people were more interested in sports, I was interested in how things work and how to solve problems. And I would always look at something and say, okay, how can I make this function? And I had a lot of inventions before I was even 14 years old. The automatic fish feeder, where you could put a certain amount of fish food in a container, and you had a schematic, and every so many hours this would go around, and then it would drop the food in there, and then it would be refilled by a chute with more food. So you could go away for a month, and your fish would get the same amount of food once a day. The electric fabric measure. In fact, they invited me, the Measurograph Corporation invited me out to, I think it was St. Louis, to show them my model. I built a model because until that time, when you went to buy fabric, you would take a roll of fabric and you would cut it, and then you'd rip it. But it always rips off at an angle. So I invented a machine that you put the roll of fabric in, you dial how much you want, 3 yards, and then it pulls down 3 yards and a razor comes across and cuts it. So you save money. I invented the highway flashing safety sign. There's a road called Route 50 going from Clarksburg, West Virginia to Parkersburg, West Virginia. And it's very treacherous. It's considered the most dangerous road, or it was at that time in West Virginia. I drew how you could put one of those strips across the road with a sign that flashed. That's when your car went over it, the car on the other side of the curve that you wouldn't see had a sign that flashed saying, slow down, approaching car on the other side. When you went around it and went over it again, it would turn off. But this way, both people approaching a dangerous point would then be warned. The commissioner of the highway safety in West Virginia invited me to come down and give him a demonstration. Dr. Kit Carson from Pittsburgh Steel invited me up because I had a way of having a catalyst, a magnetic catalyst, to take the heavy metals that would be attracted to the magnets out of smokestacks when they were burning coal and for the steel mills, power, and they all sat around while I showed them all my schematics of how much this could clean up the air. I had so many inventions, over 140 different inventions when I was still a teenager. So I went to New York. And so I arrived in New York City with $12, knowing no one. And when I got off the bus, I I put my jacket on, then realized someone had stolen the money out of my jacket. So literally my first day in New York City, I had no money. And so I stopped the cop and I said, where can a person hang out that's safe? And he said, go up to Central Park. So I went to Central Park and I spent the night. I was really naive. I was shy, I was naive, but I was excited to be in one of the most wonderful places on the planet with some of the nicest people, creative minds. My parents were absolutely right. New York didn't reject you because of your uniqueness, they embraced your uniqueness. And then I saw how to survive in New York on a shoestring, and I wrote a book, and it became popular. Very early, when I was still very young, I was only in New York about 6 months, and I had a little one-room apartment on 89th Street. On the corner was a guy who had a chimpanzee, and when I would go to the park to run in the morning, the chimpanzee would sit there and put his hands up, and I'd go over and put my hands up. And then one day the owner opened the window and said, hey, I see you running all the time. He was overweight. And he said, could you help me? I said, sure. I tried to help him. I'd take him to the park. And in return, every time I go into his apartment, I'd meet Kokomo Jr., who was on the Dave Garroway show. He asked me one weekend would I spend time with Kokomo, and I did. And over the next 2 years, I was able to teach her over 167 different meanings of words. So I wrote about From Instinct to Intellect, a study of primates. During that time, a friend of the owner was a man named Dr. Lawrence LeShan, Turns out he was one of the finest psychologists and one of the most innovative psychologists in America. He was the one who could predict in healthy women with no history of breast cancer, if they get breast cancer, based upon whether or not they felt appreciated for all the sacrifices and responsibilities they were doing for other people. He saw what I was doing with Kokomo, which just blew him away. And he said, I want to introduce you to someone. So he introduced me to the director of the Institute of Applied Biology, which is also associated with Trafalgar Hospital. And here were all these scientists from around the world working in there, like 16 different departments. And so I had a long meeting with the director and a woman named Elena, who's still alive, and the director and Dr. LaShawn, who did work there as well. And they said, what would you like to do? And I said, I believe that we could live in a healthy way to about 130 years. I believe that we prematurely age because of our choices we make. He says, well, you want to prove that? I said, yeah. He says, well, we've got a third floor here, top floor. You got a big room, and that way you can do your health stuff. I started a fasting program. I fasted mice each day, meaning from the last meal at night until the first meal in the morning was about 15 hours. And I did this for their entire lifespan. They lived almost 27% longer. Now, what I didn't know at the time is that's the only study at that time that had been done on intermittent fasting. They didn't submit that because they didn't see it was relevant. And as a result, Dr. Roy Warford, brilliant scientist, got the credit for that almost 7 years later when he published his article. That became scientific news. And I'm thinking, wow, I read his article and mine preceded it. I did research that preceded the work on energy medicine at McGill University. And what I found was this. And my first experiment to prove this or disprove it was with people to see if they could heal. I believed that there was a reason why some people know before knowing. They have a sense, like a sixth sense, that something's happening to someone, and they'll call and find out that that's correct. But it was just a theory, a hypothesis. So now I was able to put it in motion, and I brought in 50 people who claimed they could successfully help a person with a major disease. And so I had ascites tumors, rats that lived about 22 days. And of these 50 people, after they all were given a chance, took a whole year, all the mice died except for 5. So those 5 people then, I did this same experiment 6 times because one of the foundations of science is reproducibility. There are photographs of Dr. Dolores Krieger in a gray outfit with her mouse number 37. How about that? There was Dr. Morton Jacobs, Dr. Thomas Kruth, Dr. Audrey Carger, and Rabbi Abraham Wiseman. And all of these people were able to create a healing. So it wasn't coincidental, it was proven. Now the question is, what actually happened? And what happened was an exchange of energy. And Dr. Dolores Krieger was head of nursing at New York University Nursing School. And from that experiment that proved that human beings share an energy that goes beyond what mechanistic, linear science says, that we're just a bunch of mechanical parts. There's no afterlife, there's just us. There's no such thing as energy in the human being. We proved that whole theory wrong. And that's where therapeutic touch for nurses came in. For those of you who believe in intuition and believe in prayer and believe in that you can share in love, an energy exchanges because you feel it, your hormones respond to it. Everyone has this capacity. Not everybody knows how to heal or is even open to that. But I proved, at least for the first time, that this was possible. I also was told that when I'd completed this experiment, I could not publish it through the Institute because the world was not ready for energy medicine. And therefore, it was pharmaceutical medicine. Therefore, I submitted it to the leading journals on psychotronic research in medicine, meaning energy medicine. Not only were my articles accepted, but they became the articles in all of science at that point that proved this could be done. In fact, I received 2 acceptance letters from 2 different articles I wrote, and one was from the leading psychotronic research journal in the Paranormal, and there were doctors like Dr. Stanley Krippner and others, Dr. Thomas Kruth, Dr. Graff in the United States, who came by the center all the time, who were monitoring this, and the ability to exchange energy in a constructive way. Now, today, you would see this energy medicine in homeopathy, in traditional Chinese medicine like acupuncture, the stimulation of meridians, which open up energy flow, traditional exercise like Tai Chi and Qigong, and meditation, mindful meditation, that can lower your blood pressure, that can change your heart rate, that can help you reduce your cortisol levels. All of these are now in the mainstream peer-reviewed National Library of Medicine as acceptable theories and practices. These are not unscientific any longer. And then I did more studies. I did a total over 36 years of over 165 studies successfully. And some are very important, like therapeutic touch. But then I thought, okay, let me try this with plants. I put a ficus plant, which is generally used in shrubs, in a room. And this room was iron-leaded, and I gave each one of these people a message that no one else knew. Like one person would go in and sing to the plant, another would go in and spray it, another would go in and wipe the leaves off. But one of those people would go in and shake it and rip off a leaf. Jump ahead 3 months. We hooked up the plant with different probes that would measure if there was any activity. It was on 0. And we put it in the root system. And each person went in, and the plant showed no measurement. When the person that shook the leaves and tore a leaf off went in, zip, right over. That plant recognized that person and immediately responded, which showed that we've been so limited in our understanding of life and consciousness. And now, today, we know from the great work of double PhD up in Canada, that trees communicate with one another through their network of root systems. So that was just one of the experiments I did. I did a lot more psi experiments.
I worked for 50 years as a research scientist at the Institute of Applied Biology for cancer research, for immunology, and for degenerative diseases, including alcohol, drug addiction, etc. For 33 years, Dr. Garinol was working in the laboratory in the research capacity with the group of researchers that we had at the time. His work was mainly in anti-aging medicine. He conducted more than 130 experiments at the time.
I was the first person to discover and prove that you did not have to eat animal proteins, meaning chicken, fish, beef, pork, at all, in order to get all 8 essential amino acids. Those amino acids the body could not produce, but had to get from exogenous or outside sources. It took me a couple years, but I finally did it as the Egg Project. Now that was important. I was appointed a research fellow, and then later a senior research fellow. And I'm very proud of that because I was the youngest in the Institute's history. What I didn't know is after all those experiments, and after a meeting every month where everyone showed their work when it was ready for publication, nobody ever said, we're not going to send it out for publication. I only found this out last year when Elena, who was dying of end-stage pancreatic cancer and also who had 7 strokes, felt that she only had days to live. She wrote me a letter and she said that I'm at the end of my life, I've had these strokes, and I've always regretted something, that you had more original inventions than anyone else in the history of the Institute, and we never submitted because we were afraid that we would lose our funding from Big Pharma if we did, because yours didn't require any drugs. Nobody could win a Nobel Prize, nobody could do anything with the material, and yet you were doing all this. I didn't know they had to submit it for peer-reviewed publication. Other people got, their stuff published, I didn't. I went ahead and published more than 250 plus articles on scientific topics in the Towns Letter for Physician and Patients on all forms of my discoveries, and also on my work with AIDS. In fact, the longest article ever published in the Towns Letter for Physicians and Patients was my article on 3 patients and natural therapies that helped them reverse their HIV positive and AIDS conditions, got them back to normal health. I've had over 154 articles published in Global Research, one of the most respected scholarly publications in the world, read by thousands of scientists, physicians, professors, and different philosophies. But I've continued. I didn't stop after 36 years. No, I'm still doing clinical studies. In fact, right now, I just got published in a respected peer-reviewed journal with 12 other authors. I'm the lead author because it was my experiment. So I was doing all kinds of research on telomeres and stem cells, etc. But then I decided to see what I could do if I could reverse disease, and I was able to. I have thousands of testimonials that we filmed in different clinical studies. And these were all medically monitored by Dr. Martin Feldman, a graduated #1 at Yale Medical School, College of Physician Surgeons, Mount Sinai, associate professor, published over 84 articles in peer-reviewed journals. And he would review all of my clinical studies. And I did about almost 60 clinical studies. This is outside of the Institute. This is separate. This is where I took large numbers of people. Let's say they had arthritis. So I do a 28-day arthritis program.
In the last 4 weeks, everything has really changed. My swelling has gone down. I almost feel normal again.
The pain level has gone down about, I'd say, 50 to 70%.
I wasn't able to stand more than 5 minutes without my knees buckling. And now, 4 weeks later, my pain is about 50% less.
The decrease in pain is phenomenal.
This hand right here, I actually literally was not able to make a fist over 4 weeks ago without having difficulties with my fingers.
My goal for the last 33 years since I started to suffer the ill effects of arthritis is to be able to look over my right shoulder. I'm able to do this without swinging my whole body.
In 6 days on this protocol, you see me standing here now, I'm shaking a little bit. I couldn't do this last week. In 6 days, it's been amazing. And I appreciate it.
And you could only get in if you had arthritis for at least 7 years, crippling arthritis. And you had to have a letter from your rheumatologist showing you how long you were with rheumatoid arthritis or osteoarthritis or lupus and what medications you were on. Then I would give you a protocol, and during that 4-week period we would film everyone on day 1 and the last day. And you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it was possible. People who couldn't walk up the steps, they were bounding up the steps. And we have all that testimony. That was one of these projects. I did one on brain diseases. You could only get in if you had advanced, medically untreatable Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and autism. And over 16 months, meeting once a week, I was able to reverse myasthenia gravis and all these conditions. I took these people down to Washington, D.C. to a scientific conference. The scientists could not believe, thousands of scientists couldn't believe when these people got up and started telling their story.
She said that your son is mentally retarded and that there's no hope for your son.
I was in a little bit of denial at first. You actually didn't want to believe that. But the signs were there. We knew he wasn't developing the way his brother, Rex Sample, was developing.
The fits of violence lasted until Jonathan was put on medication. The psychiatrist said that this was the best course of action for Jonathan so that he wouldn't harm himself and other children.
We went along with whatever the doctor told us to do for him, which was, of course, put him on medicine.
Jonathan had told me one day, Mom, I want to kill myself. And I looked at him, I said, Jonathan, what did you just say? I went back to the psychiatrist and he said, oh, your son is depressed now. He should be on Ritalin. At that time, Jose and I walked out of his office. We looked at each other and we said, enough, enough.
Like Jonathan, the young guy with autism, he couldn't even speak, he grunted. And after 7 months on the protocols, he went and knocked on the back door and then turned to his mom and says, I'm going to go out in the backyard. He had only grunted, and she about fell off the chair. He'd been on 5 medications, and now he's off no medications at all. Now he's living a normal life, top of his class when he was in school. And Kenny, who had end-stage multiple sclerosis, we had to carry him up the steps.
I was diagnosed with MS 2008. The doctor immediately prescribed a drug called Avonex. You're going to go to a MS center and learn how to inject yourself for the rest of your life. That's just symptom management. That's all they know. The most likely outcome is you in a wheelchair. And that's the best that they could offer, is say, okay, symptom management. I knew in my heart that there was something else I could do.
Today, he is 16 years free of all multiple sclerosis. And he had 3 separate sets of experts who went over his multiple sclerosis. Couldn't find any.
I'm MS free, I'm not in a wheelchair, and my quality of life is phenomenal. All you know in life is whatever's been presented to you, whether it be from your family, an educator, authority figure, and for the most part, that's all people go with. Anything that really worked, then we would know about it, it'd be in the media, and it would be out already, and everyone would be using it. The problem is not everyone looks at the politics of it and says, well, okay, well, if that were to be so, who's losing out? Who's not making money anymore? All the businesses that make money off the prescription drugs. Everything that's of the current paradigm has nothing to do with a healing state.
I did another study of 500 women who had depression or anxiety over 3 months, reversed 94% of it, and it stayed reversed because I followed people for a year. And menopausal women, 500 women I met with every week for a year, and we reversed all of their menopausal symptoms, all of them, and brought them back a whole new sense of self.
At menopause, your body shifts just enough so you no longer are able to produce eggs, but you're also still producing adequate levels of estrogen to maintain the functions of your body. At menopause, the outer part of the ovaries, which has been more responsible for producing eggs, begins to shrink because eggs are no longer being created. But the inner part, called the inner stroma, actually gets switched on for the first time. It produces hormones that look after your heart, your blood vessels, your skin, your libido, protecting the woman's body and her well-being.
There's one particular study that I'm very pleased with the outcome. In 2017, the National Library of Medicine, PubMed, published a peer-reviewed journal article that I had written along with Dr. Martin Feldman and Luann Panisi, and it dealt with a topic that so many people could benefit from. We took a group of 22 individuals, and over a period of 3 months, meeting once a week for 3 to 4 hours, we talked about lifestyle and behavior modification. They were all put on a very healthy diet, a vegan, plant-based diet. They were given juices, healthy juices to take every day. They were given proper supplementation, such as the B complex and B12 and folate, as a glycerol phosphofolate and phosphatidylserine, NAD, PQQ, etc. So we did all these different variables on how to take a stressful situation, sometimes acute stress, sometimes chronic, and bring that energy down through deep breathing, mindful meditation, emotionally going to neutral. What kind of outcome could I have if I approach it differently? What if I change my perception? Do I need to be angry? Do I need to yell? Do I need to get depressed? When you get angry and you get hyper excited about something, it can change the rhythms to the heart and actually cause a heart attack. At the end of that 3-month period, by being on a healthy vegan diet, exercising, taking proper supplementation, being mindful of your environment, and then most importantly, grounding yourself in knowing who are you as an individual. We master our careers, we sometimes master our relationships, certainly many people master their work, but they don't master their life. 90% of the people made enormous improvements. But what made this unique was these were neurologically challenged people. To get into the study, you had to have a letter from your neurologist or psychiatrist showing that you had been suffering for years with a non-reversible condition, meaning multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, dementia, memory loss, Alzheimer's, and acute depression and anxiety, so severe that it adversely affected your capacity to have any quality of life. Some people couldn't even work because they were so mentally challenged. So that was the basis. And then they had to have a complete neurological evaluation by Dr. Martin Feldman, one of America's leading neurologists, in order to qualify to get in the study. So there were about 300 people tried to get in, and only 22 met all of our criteria. And what was important was this was found to be original enough and unique enough. It received peer review acceptance, publication in a major publication, and then cited on PubMed. That led me to a more definitive study that took 16 months. And then that led to publishing in a peer-reviewed journal and then being invited to various scientific conferences of orthodox medicine to show how this happened. And I've had multiple studies that I've done. So this is just one example in the area of how we can make major changes in our lives. But my most important work as a scientist was starting in 1974, when I got a call from Dr. Stephen Kaez, a highly respected gay physician in New York, one of the many gay physicians in New York. But he called me and he says, "Gary, I listen to your radio show, and I've got about 800 patients, and they've got conditions I've never seen before. Can you work with them?" And I did. Over a period of 10 years, 1974 to 84, I worked with about 800. And the vast majority were able to get back to normal health. It was in their lifestyle. But we don't want to believe that something as simple as lifestyle choices, diet, exercise, and stress management can make a difference. We discard it. And it turned these people around. So when AIDS came, I'd already been working with people who had AIDS-like symptoms and reversing them. So at the Tri-State Healing Center, which I opened, first on near the Riverside Drive from 84th Street in a brownstone that I had, and 2 floors were dedicated to the Tri-State Healing Center. And we were treating people, oh my goodness, from 8 in the morning until 8 at night. We were open, and we must have given vitamin drips and intravenous ozone probably to about 100 per day, and you see amazing results. But then we got so busy, I rented a big space on 72nd and Broadway. And I had the Tri-State Healing Center for about 15 years. We were flooded with people with HIV and AIDS conditions, full-blown AIDS. These were not people who were just HIV positive but symptomatic and otherwise healthy. No, these were sick people. We never had one die, not one. And so I created all the protocols, and I had 22 medical staff, board-certified physicians, and holistic dentists, and holistic nurse practitioners, and acupuncturists, chiropractors, psychologists, and the Dr. Albert Ellis Center, like Dr. Dolan Mullins and Dr. Lane Kahn. It was every kind of complementary approach to a patient, their conditions. And so of the 1,200 people then in 1984, 85, 86, all of them were able to regain their health. But then I realized that I have to do additional compensation of a higher potency. And so I asked, who would like to volunteer? How would you like to come every day for 6 days a week? The good news is I've never charged a penny to any person with AIDS in my life. In fact, I've counseled tens of thousands of people. I've never charged a single person in my entire career. We had a total of 18 volunteers. I gave the Institute of Applied Biology, their mainstream orthodox medical doctor and nurse, 10 cases. And over the next 4 years, every one of those 10 cases were completely reverted. When I mean reverted, total health restored, no HIV found in their body. They went from HIV positive to negative. We had all the blood chemistries, used Roche Lab. We had it on a regular basis. We were working with Liberty Labs, and we made sure that we knew everything in their body was going on. Tri-State Healing Center, in over 16 months, we reversed 8 out of 8. Well, then word got around, mainly in the African American community. Stokely Carmichael, who was a major civil rights activist, he came by. Dick Gregory, who was a personal friend of mine, he came by. Isaac Hayes. And then Bill Tatum, the publisher of the largest African American newspaper, the Amsterdam News, came by. And we had an open door policy. You could come in, you could speak with the people. If they gave permission, you could see their records. And then Tony Brown of PBS, Tony Brown Show, syndicated on over 400 stations, I believe. He invited me on, but it took months because he had to have a person named Kennedy come up and inspect all the records and go through it. And when they were 100% satisfied that there was no quackery or fraud, that it was legitimate, then I was invited on. I was invited on 8 times with those 8 people.
Who says he can now offer evidence that people diagnosed with, quote, AIDS, who have turned to a non-toxic lifestyle, also return to good health. I'm Tony Brown. In a moment, good news about AIDS and HIV.
This man has been helped. I brought 2 other people on your show 3 years ago. They're both alive and well and continue to remain seroconverted.
Now let's talk about this man. This man, you say, is the benefactor of your protocol.
Yes.
Right after I started doing this protocol, my lymph nodes went down. Now they're completely normal. They're down. I don't feel anything. I had them like for years.
How long have they been down?
4 years.
4 years?
4 years, yeah.
And how long did it take after you started the program with Dr. Null before they went down?
It took me about a good 6 to 8 months. I started like detoxifying my system, and I just improved my health. I gained weight, for one, and I feel great right now.
Now, these are medical records you brought with you today.
That's right. You have 12 copies of my medical records there.
What do these medical records
Well, one
prove?
is a PCR test. PCR test indicates the viral low level, HIV viral low level. It's negative.
What does that mean?
That means that there is no HIV virus in my system. It's out. They can't detect it in a blood test.
There are many tests that he's taken. It's not just one test. I ask individuals to test when they're at this level almost every 2 to 3 months for at least a year. And the reason I do this is because other physicians and public health officials should know that there's good science in the alternative perspective. And it may not be a therapy that they're familiar with because they're just not trained in it. But if the results are positive and you can document them and you have good medical blood workups, I mean, the blood workups are done at all the standard labs, and the physicians are all board certified physicians who are actually overseeing and administering the actual therapy, then either they say yes or no.
Bill McCrary, again, African-American, multi-Emmy award-winning producer on Channel 5.
On the subject of AIDS, we talked with Steve Atkins, a former HIV positive patient who, according to health department records, has converted to negative. He was introduced to us by nutritionist journalist Gary Null, who was instrumental in Atkins' AIDS treatment. And once again this morning we're joined by Mr. Null and a HIV positive couple. Now, what's the prognosis for both of you today?
Well, I just want to say that I started out, the first thing they tell you to do is to have your cell count taken, and I went from a 600, which is below normal, to 1,000, which is a normal cell count for anyone who is even not HIV. We just follow a very, very healthy diet, and I can honestly say I feel in well health. And my husband went from having like no T cells to a very positive test now that I guess Gary will explain to you that it's not active at all.
Yes, I think we'll turn to
the most
Sonal now.
important
Yes,
thing
you
here
have
is this.
Record here.
This is a test from Roche Biomedical Laboratories, which is division of Hoffman Roche.
Turn
This
it around a little bit
This
more.
is an official blood chemistry test. This shows that, and here's what's important, and this is why we're not talking about a test tube and stopping a virus in a test tube. These are live human beings. Their physician, using a holistic protocol, and this is a regular Orthodox doctor, in a year, this person went from HIV positive active virus to P24 antigen test negative, HIV antibody positive. That means the HIV to have no antigen 24 means you have no active HIV active in the body. All you have is the antibody. Now, that means this person has made substantial improvement.
When we first began with these AIDS patients in this comprehensive program, we would have weekly meetings with the entire group headed by Dr. Null, and we reviewed all the cases. We did regular blood workups on the patients, monitoring their T cell counts, their CD counts, as well as their viral load from the HIV virus. We saw all the viral loads come down, the T cell counts returned to normal, and eventually we had our first breakthrough after 16 months with our first seroconversion from HIV positive to HIV negative. And following that time, we had 7 more patients who seroconverted, and none of these patients were well when they first came in, so we did it the easy way. They were all very sick with various symptoms, AIDS-related symptoms.
Every one of these 8 patients remarkably reversed their HIV positive diagnosis to HIV negative. In other words, they seroconverted. At the beginning of the treatment, these patients gave the center permission to share the results of their blood tests, their viral load analysis, and disease status with outside physicians and journalists.
So Gary took me back in his office. He showed me, I think it was 5 or 6 medical records, and it was not just one medical record, but for each client, each patient, he had, after every 3 months or so, another lab workup done. And so you could see the progression. And these people, according to the records, had seroconverted.
With Gary, what he did was change the person's diet completely, which was what I did. They stopped eating as much as the garbage that they were eating, the sugars and a lot of other things. Anything that would lower their immune system. We put them on green juicing, we put them on supplements, and they did remarkably well for those who followed. Not everybody would follow. Let's face it, not everybody is going to follow a protocol. But there are those people who did follow the protocol, and there were a few of them that really were fantastic. They were put on many, many different things, and there are a few people that serum converted.
We set up a whole program at the Institute of Applied Biology where we apply Dr. Gary Knoll's approach of treatment. After 4 years of treating those patients with repeated blood analysis and everything else, we saw that 10 of those patients that he was working with, they were no more seropositive. They were completely in remission, and then we continued testing them, and they were completely cured.
That was around the same time when we were inundated with AIDS cases and were largely unsuccessful in treating them. One physician asked if there was anything you could do, and you offered to try. We established IV drip rooms and purchased intravenous vitamin C and other nutrients, and the staff implemented your AIDS protocol. Over the next 2 years, about 10 people with advanced AIDS reversed their HIV status and turned seronegative. All the infections disappeared, and they were HIV and AIDS free. I briefly met one of those patients recently, and she was still healthy today. I remember when I met with the director and the Institute board members one evening to request that these successes be made more public. They decided to remain silent because it might jeopardize funding. This work was not based on patentable drugs, and the advisory board said it would only draw negative attention because it was contrary to standard drug treatments. After the meeting ended, the director shrugged his shoulders and said it would not be the last time that someone accomplished something notable, and it would remain relatively unknown to the world. Best regards always, Dr. Ilana Avram, Senior Scientist and Research Fellow.
At that time, no one was having such a fantastic results when was the worst epidemic of AIDS. As usually, the scientific community, mainstream scientific community, they were not agreeable with these natural approaches that we showed them. They never publish it and they never apply it. The problem was that the fear of the big pharma, they were afraid of losing the financial support. That was the reason that they never come out with Dr. Gary Knoll approach with natural, non-toxic, and so on.
So one day I get a call from Bill Tatum, and he said, "It's time that African American community in New York knows your work. Are you willing to do a lecture up at Apollo Theater?" I said, "Sure." Well, I didn't realize till I got up there that it was packed. There was a long line down the block and around the block. So I said, I told these people, come back tomorrow. It was free, and come in. And Arthur Ashe was there, the tennis great, and all these other people were there, and they spoke before me talking about how using my protocols, they had gotten great results. This went on for 3 days. We estimated about 1,600 people at a time, 3 times in a row. But then we looked around and no news media covered it. We held a press conference a year later where we had 100 of the people who had major improvements using my protocols. Dr. Cathcart was there from Stanford University, a great inventor. And he had come for 2 weeks, and he was very diligent. He was there at 8 in the morning sitting on the stoop, and he would be there at midnight when we locked up. And he'd talk with patients, and he took the protocols back to California. He never had an AIDS patient die after that from pneumocystis or Kaposi sarcoma.
He came in, watched what we were doing, started to use it on his patients, and started to see the reversal of Kaposi sarcoma and all the lung infections and all the other AIDS-related problems. So we were able to take and train doctors over time in our methods of medicine and protocols that we had collectively put together, and they got the same results. This proves that it wasn't just us, but that anybody with this training could get the same results as well.
Linus Pauling came by. And again, none of this made the media. So when our press conference came, and we had worked for a year on this, and we had an independent scientific review looking at all the results so they could validate this, not a single member of the media showed up, not a single member of the medical or AIDS community showed up. That is pernicious. That is how corrupt the system was.
Why is it that when we have live human bodies, not a petri dish, who had full-blown AIDS, who were at death's door and medically documented, today are alive and well and completely normal, and no one covers the story?
Let's look at some of the alternative therapies such as oxygen therapy and vitamin therapy and herbalism and some of what we're hearing today. Why are we afraid as a society when our people are dying not to examine new and alternative therapies?
Finally, to fight the news blackout that seemed to have occurred, we decided to have an all-day event at one of the largest churches over on the west side of Manhattan. We had over 2,000 people show up, and we invited and paid for several dozen scientists and doctors to come in, lecture and speak on how everything had worked, what they found. And once again, the news media blocked out this entire happening, this entire meeting from the news so that nobody would know that it had occurred and all the benefits that people had achieved.
And I can understand why. There's no money to be made on it. You know, they were selling AZT. Put time on your side, take AZT. No, 300,000 plus people died taking AZT, and nobody apologized. We've seen that a lot in science. In fact, I directed the film Science for Hire just this past year.
The way that I believe things work, that there were rules, that we all obey these rules, that these rules were designed to keep us safe and protect us and to ensure that there was equity and proper way of doing things. I realized that that was just grossly naive.
It's not science, it's business. And that's the problem we have, because you cannot get to see the data.
It's whatever those in power say is what goes.
It's pretty clear they're not working in the interests of the public. They're working in the interests of the industry, and there's a problem. So, I mean, science is broken.
So who do we believe? What is true? And what happens when one group has total power?
This is the largest experiment performed on human beings in the history of the world. It's being enabled by a regulatory structure that is not designed to protect us.
Dr. Fauci, do you still support funding of the NIH funding of the lab in Wuhan?
The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain of function research in the Wuhan Institute.
The NIH, CDC are so influenced by Big Pharma. Big Pharma is the biggest contributor to lobbyists. They control the media. They have a stranglehold on free speech.
When you have people at an FDA meeting making a statement that we need to vaccinate the children, but we won't know what happens to them until we vaccinate them, that's the experimental phase.
In 1986, Congress passed a law that made it illegal for any American to sue a vaccine company.
Medical doctors are being silenced. Why are they losing their licenses? These are people who are trained professionals. It's unprecedented.
It is a cost-benefit analysis in the pharmaceutical industry about misbehavior. They are not grounded in the ethical principles that you and I, as average people, believe in. They are about profit, return on investment. And furthermore, the overlords that own them, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, etc., these large, massive funds that are completely decoupled from nation states, have no moral core. They have no moral purpose. Their only purpose is return on investment. And that is the core problem here.
And plus prescription for disaster.
The Eli Lilly Corporation, for nearly 15 years, covered up their own internal investigation that showed anyone on Prozac is 12 times more likely to attempt suicide.
$8 billion a year on sales representatives.
50% of the money that the FDA spends reviewing drugs comes from the pharmaceutical companies.
In January of 2002, I switched over to Vioxx, and I was taking it probably 3 or 4 times a week. I collapsed at work. I had a stroke right then and there at work.
The doctor told us that he thought the drug Prozac would help Jacob, that it's a common prescribed drug used in teenagers now, that he thought it would help him with his moods. I left for work, and a few hours later I began to call home because with him being at home by himself, I was concerned. I found my son hanging in our attic.
There was an orchestrated campaign by senior-level FDA managers to intimidate me so that I would not testify before Congress.
And the war on health.
We have the FDA, the IRS, the EPA, FEMA, and many others functioning autonomously and unchecked with the full force of the federal government.
It's a government of, by, and for the bureaucrat. It really is a government that's out of control and that threatens our liberties every day.
The FDA uses its power to censor and disallow truthful claims about the value of nutritional supplements.
The dietary supplement industry is under siege by the FDA. Drug lobbyists do not want the American public to have access to low-cost, totally safe nutritional supplements that compete with pharmaceuticals.
The FDA uses Gestapo-like tactics when it decides to take action against a dietary supplement company or a food company.
We have 100,000 armed federal agents, many of them working for the Food and Drug Administration, and we see that those agents are engaging in behaviors that are reprehensible.
They started walking around, they drew their guns, and I'm like, why are you drawing guns?
Are we going to be forced to consume GMOs and chemically laced food and milk with recombinant bovine growth hormone? Are we going to have to eat animals with antibiotics? And the answer is you already are.
The FDA is truly a rogue agency being run by rogues from industry, government, academia.
FDA receives 40% of their budget from drug companies. They're hired guns, and they're out there serving the best interests of the company. They do not represent the American public.
The FDA, in my opinion, has probably killed more Americans in this country than all the wars that the U.S. has ever fought combined.
How can it possibly be that a branch or a division of this government is not beholden to the Constitution? This is a government of tyranny.
Put it this way. If orthodox medicine has all the answers and is supposed to be the only voices of reason and truth and real science, okay, then why don't they show us all of the people who died trusting them? And if we take the number 500,000 as an average over the last 10 years, that's 5 million people. 5 million people. And why don't they ever tell us how many people died from the therapy, iatrogenesis? But they won't. And by the way, I did the book and the film, Death by Medicine.
Drugs that have been said to be too unsafe to approve by the FDA's own medical reviewers have been approved over their objections and entered into the market, causing the very harms they predicted.
The FDA, in my opinion, has probably killed more Americans in this country than all the wars that the U.S. has ever fought combined.
The drugs themselves cause death, disability, further symptoms, which typically are further treated with other drugs.
As an ethical issue, they never think, gee, this is going to kill people, I shouldn't do it.
The problem is that the pharmaceutical companies have one objective. That is not the health and safety of the individuals in this country, but the almighty dollar.
Over $1 billion in the last decade has been spent lobbying the Congress of the United States by the pharmaceutical industry.
And so Congress has become really a threat to the health and the safety of the American people.
They're going to become chronically ill. They're going to become chronically depressed. That's the expected end. And that's why they will need to be on these drugs for life. We're not killing them quickly, but we're taking their lives away.
Even when life is threatened, even when there are avoidable risks of cancer, what kind of Alice in Wonderland situation are we in?
We have a system of medicine that's broken, that by itself is killing at least 700,000 people a year. Some people are dying since they don't have health insurance, but what about the number of people who are dying because of the current system?
And AIDS Inc., and AIDS A Second Opinion, and AIDS The Real Heroes, The Pain, Profit, and Politics of AIDS, Vaccine Nation, and Autism Made in USA, and Golf Force Syndrome, Killing Our Own. I've done dozens of films showing true science, true healing, versus corporate science and propagandizing.
We've taken down the forests. Why did we do that? We didn't know what we were doing.
Who's responsible for the sixth extinction and for the Anthropocene? It's the capitalist system that has produced this crash in the number of species and in ecosystems around the world.
We've created a worldwide Auschwitz for animals, and we are killing 57 billion animals for our tables every year, as well as destroying the habitats of most of the creatures on the planet. We're living in a time in which 150 species are vanishing every day.
As the oceans become more acidic from greenhouse gas pollution, the world's largest traded food commodity, seafood, is threatened. It is estimated that by 2048, there will no longer be any seafood to eat.
All animals and plants on the earth right now are migrating towards the poles, and the regions where these plants and animals exist now are getting uncomfortably warm.
We're going to see levels of methane release go off the charts. It's another climate feedback loop that would be essentially irreversible. We're already seeing entire countries and entire regions completely destabilized by events that are being driven by climate change.
Our track record leaves very little confidence that we have a future.
Hundreds of thousands of scientists around the world who are doing research on aging. But more often than not, the vast majority are researching stem cells.
Some of the most fascinating aspects of interventions available today to slow and/or reverse aging has to do with multimodal approaches. We start off, of course, with very healthy diets, very healthy lifestyles, physical activity to the best that people are able to adhere to, and of course, dietary supplements, that's a given. But then we have to move beyond that.
Can we, with all that we're doing, can we actually change the DNA? Can we heal the breaks in the DNA? Can we stop the massive amount of challenges by free radicals and cytokines and other inflammatory markers that attack your DNA about 10,000 times per day per cell that cause us to age? Now, I've shown on campus, using a special protocol I created, that we can reverse the aging process and add years onto our life. I've done five times over the last 3.5 years. Now, major universities are helping support us in this effort, and I'm doing one more this coming spring.
These reports are saying is that I have 4th stage lung cancer, I'm morbidly obese, I have sustained high blood pressure, I have diabetes, I have acute renal failure, and I am in chronic pain.
I recently went for a osteoporosis test, and the orthopedic doctor said that I lost 20 pounds in 2 years, and he said I lost a lot of bone.
All the lessons that I learned in the anti-aging study, I think applies just about anyone with any sense of discipline who are willing to put themselves out there and just try something totally new. I think one of the hallmarks of the study for me is that you weren't taking piecemeal programs. This was a complete holistic program that Gary prepared.
This is a specific observational clinical study, meaning everybody had to do the same thing under supervision every single day. It's 90 days, 60 days on campus, before and after blood workup. We tested for dozens of different objective markers in the body that are indicative of the aging process, like C-reactive protein and homocysteine, fibrinogen, and triglycerides, and LDL cholesterol, among others. Almost 60 different things we're measuring in the blood. And then a university allowed us to use their patented DNA methylation test. That tells you how old each cell, each organ in the body is. And also before and after impedance, before and after psychological evaluation, before and after with the amount of lean muscle tissue and their endurance and their stamina and the intensity of their exercise capacity. Gourmet, vegan, gluten-free, living foods like sprouts. In fact, the sprouts are grown here, and the microgreens grown here.
I couldn't walk a mere 5 feet without practically collapsing in pain. Short breath, I couldn't catch my breath. I was in very bad shape. My blood sugar, even with medications that I was taking at the time, was more than 202. That is to say, I was on the brink. My blood pressure was over 200 with 3 medications. So here I am in the greatest challenge that I've ever had in my life. And it is, in fact, threatening my life. But there was hope, and the hope was Gary.
The protocol that Gary Knoll introduced to Miss Utrice, she lost lots of weight. Her blood pressure, which was when I met her, over 200 systolically, and blood sugar over 200. That all those vital signs have come to normal limits. She also had a miraculous finding recently when she had MRIs of the brain Lungs and kidneys and liver are all clear as well. All this transformation has happened. The weight loss, the vital signs stabilizing, and the clear MRI. Gary Knowles' protocol seems to be changing your life.
I'm feeling a clarity of energy. I have better circulation in my extremities, which has been a problem for me in my past. I am actually feeling a lot stronger, if you will, because we also receive supplements that actually lend to building stronger muscles for endurance. And I think that has a lot to do with my speed now that I am accomplishing in my power walking. My lungs are clear, and I've had a third check with the pulmonologist, but they could find no obstruction, so they had no justifications for respiratory therapy. So now I can breathe again. I feel alive. I feel actually that my lungs have been reborn. And this is a revelation for me. I feel that it's a miracle. Again, it wasn't until my doctor, who saw my blood sugar levels start to creep up, she said to me, if you don't get this under control, I'm going to have to put you on insulin. And that's what made me start to look for a program. Since then, since the dietary change and the supplements, I have gotten my fasting levels to below 100, which technically makes me non-diabetic. But I have to maintain and sustain that for at least 3 months before they decide to take me off the medication, and I'm so close. When I started, my A1C was 7.1, and today it's 6.7. So that's a really drastic change. In order to be non-diabetic, I have to be at 5.7, which I'm not too far from.
The protocol that was incorporated in this anti-aging study has changed my life. I am a much better person and I feel good. When you're ill, you don't want to do anything. When you're full of energy, you keep going. Nothing can stop you. It's like you have a battery and you keep going and going. Age doesn't mean anything anymore. I don't see boundaries.
My bone density, that's increased. My muscle mass has increased. You know, it's sort of like a sliding scale. Until I sort of like get in the swing of the schedule, I think it's just going to take time. But it's not a thing that I dread doing. Oh, going to the gym, or, you know, I used to love to swim, going to the pool, and I like going to the gym. It's exciting, you know, it's exciting to see your body develop, and you feel like a little kid again, you know. Here you are, you're working with muscles.
I'm not thinking about death. I'm thinking about a new beginning.
We're just allowing ourselves to be open to our own potential.
And my hope is I can prove that within 4 weeks of being on campus that we can extend a person's life by 5 years. That means 5 healthy quality years, and that's after just 1 month and then a follow-up. But I've already got an article published, and according to the people, including some very famous people within the aging community, this is the first time it's ever been proven. So, what have we learned? Trust in myself and trust in humanity, and harmonize my energy with others to, in our own small way, make it a better world. And oh, I've got all kinds of ideas. I'm just getting started. Hope this helps you understand a little bit more about who I am. Thank you very much for taking your time and watching this.